So what do you say?
No.
Before I start the video, as a quick reminder, check out my links down below to help support the channel. I am now in partnership with Baron of Dice. They have some awesome TCG accessories like playmats, deck boxes, and dice. And if you want to level up your setup, it is the perfect way to do so. And if you want to support the channel directly and get some sweet perks, consider joining the Patreon. If you want to get early access to videos or even some deck help, Patreon is where it's at. And so without further ado, let's get back into the video. Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin with Jurassic Magic, and today we are stepping into the 9 realms of Commander with the ultimate father and son duo, and that's of course Kratos and Atreus. If you played God of War 2018 and Ragnarok like I have, you just know how incredible their journey really is. From throwing the Leviathan axe, to firing Atreus' runic arrows, from clashing with gods, to forging their bond, I wanted to bring it all into Magic the Gathering, so let's dive into my Kratos/Atreus deck.
Boy, boy, boy. Boy, 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 boy.
So first things first, let's read the commanders and what they do. So Kratos, Stoic Father for 2 red and white. He's a legendary creature, God Warrior. Whenever you attack with one or more gods, and whenever a god dies, you get an experience counter. And at the beginning of your end step, put a number of +1/+1 counters on target creature equal to the number of experience counters you have. So first of all, I have to say I really like this concept of Kratos. Not a lot of people have been liking this, mainly because it doesn't seem as powerful as Kratos would be. I do see this card more as a story rather than just straight up power value. In the previous games of the Greek pantheon, he was more rage driven, striving for vengeance against the Olympians. But as we see in this new version of Kratos with God of War 2018 and Ragnarok, he wants to be a good father to Atreus, and he's learning along the way how to. Again, I would rather personally see a great story within a card that's flavorful to the character than just straight up power value. So Kratos learns from his mistakes and hopes to teach his son better, and I feel like that is well done with Atreus, Impulsive Son. He has the mana cost of 1 blue and red. He's a legendary creature, God Archer with reach. You can pay 3 mana and tap him, draw a card for each experience counter you have, then discard a card. Atreus deals 2 damage to each opponent, and he has a 2/4 body as well. So a lot of people saw Atreus as a whiny kid in God of War 2018, but could you really blame him? His father was always absent, and his mother died. And of course they have to go on this vigorous journey, fighting against monsters, fighting against gods, and much more.
You left me here again! Why don't you care?
I feel like a lot of people forgot about that when going through the game, that Atreus was seriously going through a lot, experiencing the new world. Of course, with the experience counters he's gaining from Kratos, he is learning more and more with card draw, along with shooting his arrows dealing 2 damage to each opponent. So hand in hand, Kratos and Atreus make the perfect pair with each other. Kratos supplies the damage, and Atreus supplies the card draw. Within the journey of God of War, they've come across many different people, most of them enemies, but of course some allies. Within this new secret lair, you do receive 2 other cards. The first one is Freya, Queen of the Valkyries. This is a reskin version of Iroas, God of Victory. Within the games, Freya is a great ally at first, but of course Kratos kills her son, then swears vengeance upon him.
And feed your soul to the vilest filth in hell! That is my promise!
But then later Kratos helps her with a lot of different struggles. Besides that point, this is a great reprint with some incredible art. Having that ability, creatures you control at menace, is going to be huge for us swinging in with our big creatures, because Kratos doesn't have trample or really any other keywords. Having menace included with him is going to help him go for some more combat damage, especially the more counters he has on himself. Of course, preventing all combat damage is going to be pretty good for our creatures, because again, this is going to be a very aggressive swingy deck. Another card within this secret lair is Mimir's Ancient Wisdom. It's known as Teferi's Ageless Insight, and honestly Mimir's the best. He has so much good wisdom to give to Kratos and Atreus and many other travelers. Of course, he's known as
Mimir, smartest man alive.
Besides the fact that he doesn't know why the gods are hunting Kratos and Atreus in the first place. Either way, I think this is a fun reprint. I wish we got Mimir maybe as a reconfigured card. I think that would have been really cool because he's like an equipment that you could just attach to you. Either way, this is still a pretty good card. If you draw a card except the first one, you draw each of your draw steps, you draw 2 cards instead. This is really powerful, especially with Atreus drawing cards. Either way, this is going to be a win-win for us, getting more card advantage. So those are the cards within the Secret Lair, and I couldn't be more excited. And ironically, I am am going through my second playthrough of God of War Ragnarok. I'm at the part where I'm fighting against Heimdall with a Draupnir spear.
You actually hit me!
So this couldn't really be any more perfect as far as timing goes because my hype levels are off the charts. But just to kind of give you a breakdown of the game plan, I wanted to first focus on the core staples, basically the tools of war that help us on our journey. Another key focus is gaining experience counters, whether we have gods on the battlefield that are dying or attacking, or if we have a little bit of a proliferation theme. The main goal of this section is to make sure we gain as much experience as a father and son duo to buff each other up and get a lot of card draw. And lastly, I want to go over the win conditions, basically the final battles that we come across and some of the finishers that we could utilize in order to achieve success. So with that said, let's get right into it, into the first section with the core staples.
Well, happy Ragnarok, everybody! Let's drink.
So every God Slayer needs their tools of war, and this deck has them. You need ramp, card draw, and interaction to help you form your game plan. And because you're in Jeskai color combination, you're mostly relying on artifact ramp. In this deck specifically, I went with a tiny bit of a treasure theme, mainly because throughout the journey of the games, we're just smashing through all sorts of treasure chests and getting a bunch of loot.
Not so easy.
So starting off small, I do have Ragavan Nimble Pilferer in this deck because when it deals combat damage, you get to make a treasure token and steal the top card of an opponent's library. I also added in some dragons like Ancient Copper Dragon and Goldspan Dragon. These will help us get a ton of treasure. Of course, they're a little bit more expensive at 5 and 6 mana, but they will get us a huge burst of mana. Another one I like is Cavern Horde Dragon. This one I think is better than the rest because at most it can be just 2 red mana to cast, and if an opponent has a lot of artifacts on their side of the battlefield, you could swing in at them and make that much treasure tokens. That's flying, trample, and haste, so it's that aggressive theme. It's what we want to be doing anyways. I felt like adding in some dragons mainly because there's a lot of boss fights within the God of War universe, especially in the Norse mythology ones where you're fighting off against dragons. I also threw in Neheb the Eternal because we are in a combat theme. I thought it would just be good just to get that extra burst of mana at the beginning of your post-combat main phase. Add a red mana for each 1 life your opponent has lost this turn. So this works with combat, or it could work with Atreus. When we tap him, we deal 2 damage to each opponent, which in return we get 6 mana off of that at our post-combat main phase. So those are some of the ways we could get mana in the game, but I also wanted to focus on some great options to give us card draw because we don't want to just rely on Atreus where there might be situations where you just have 0 experience counters. We want ways to keep our hand filled. One option I thought about was Starwinder. It has that ability whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw that many cards. So if Kratos is like an 8/8 on the battlefield swinging in at somebody, you get to draw 8 cards. There is also another reason why I added this card in the list besides the fact that it's great card draw, and that's the fact that it represents Jormungandr. Since we can't add Koma the Cosmos Serpent because it has green in its color identity, this is basically another replacement, and I would say this works flavorfully as Jormungandr because in the games he usually gives advice here and there, not a whole lot, but advice kind of forms into card draw, and that's kind of my reasoning for it. Another form of card draw is the One Ring. This will perpetually get you a ton of cards over time. This works as a great fog, so I brought this one in more for power, but also it kind of works well as a representation of Draupnir. This is the ring that Kratos got that forms into a spear to defeat Heimdall. Another interesting card would be Curiosity. This actually works with Atreus on that ability of tapping him and dealing 2 damage to each opponent. Because you're dealing damage to each opponent, you're going to be drawing 3 cards on top of that. So those are some of the ramp options and card draw options. I also wanted to focus on the interaction that you could utilize, and of course there's plenty of options because we have white and blue in our color combination. We have cards like Cyclonic Rift, Dovin's Veto, Fierce Guardianship. The list could go on and on, but one interaction piece I particularly like is Ripples of Potential. This works very well because you proliferate, then choose any number of permanents you control that had counters put on them this way. Those permanents phase out, so this works as a mini Teferi's Protection, phasing out all the creatures we have with counters on them. But more importantly, we do proliferate for 2 mana. That works in hindsight for the experience counters. So either way, this is just going to be a win-win. So those are the staples. I didn't want to dive into those too much, but those are the bread and butter of the deck. But now I wanted to shift my focus into getting more experience experience counters with proliferation and gods. So in this deck we want to get a lot of experience counters to buff up creatures with Kratos and draw a lot of cards with Atreus. So first with proliferation, I thought patrolling Peacemaker would be a good fit. Even though technically it's a robot, it doesn't necessarily fit in the God of War universe. I think it's just very powerful. For 2 and a white, this creature enters with 2 +1/+1 counters on it, and whenever an opponent commits a crime, you proliferate. And so a crime could be a lot of different things, but it's basically summed up into if any opponent uses interaction, you're going to be able to proliferate. Of course, it's a lot more to it, but you kind of get the point. Another one I quite like a lot is Norn's Choirmaster. This is a Phyrexian angel, and this kind of would represent a Valkyrie in a way, mainly because it's an angel that has flying and first strike, but most importantly, whenever a commander you control enters the battlefield or attacks, you proliferate. So this is just another way to get more experience counters, or really any other 1/1 counters on creatures you control because of Kratos. And one other way you could proliferate is by using Sword of Truth and Justice. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from white and from blue. These are really good protection colors. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control, then proliferate. So for one, this is getting 1/1 counters on creatures you control, and also it will proliferate, getting those experience counters up. So experience counters are great, but we also want to put in some gods. I didn't put a whole lot. A lot of people are just saying, oops, all gods in a deck. I personally didn't like that. I wanted to put gods in here that work for the deck specifically, because in all reality, Kratos and Atreus honestly could work for the experience counter theme. Gods are kind of just a temporary bonus. So first one up is technically a god with Amuoid Changeling, mainly because it has that changeling ability. This card is every creature type at all times, so that includes gods, but most importantly, it has that tap ability. Target creature gains all creature types until in a turn. You could use this on one of your own creatures if it's about to die, so that way you gain an experience counter with Kratos, or on the opposite end, you can make an opponent's creature into a god before it gets removed by another opponent. So in a general sense, this works as a double whammy, just getting you more experience counters by accident. Another creature I wanted to highlight is Alrund, God of the Cosmos. This is the Magic the Gathering version of Odin.
You know who I am?
And in a funny and ironic way, this works actually pretty well with Atreus, because Atreus helps him here and there to find the mask, gaining more knowledge. Because Atreus draws so much cards, Alrund, God of the Cosmos, will get buffed up for each one you have in your hand. God Eternal Oketra is also a very good god that we could utilize in this deck, because it has double strike. If we put more 1/1 counters on it with Kratos, the more we're going to be swinging in for more damage. Not only that, when we're casting creature spells, we're making zombies on the battlefield that are 4/4s with vigilance. So this will work quite well, especially if it does die. It just goes on the top third of our library. Because Amonkhet is Egyptian inspired, hopefully one day we'll go to Egypt with the God of War. I think that would be very cool, but we'll see when we get there. Also within Assassin's Creed, we did receive Surtur, and of course he is also in God of War, but in a little bit of a different take. This one works perfectly because whenever you cast a historic spell, he will deal 3 damage to any target. This can help as removal. When we're casting artifacts and legendaries, there are plenty of artifacts in our deck. Along with legendaries, we don't have really any sagas at all, but this will just lightning bolt things here and there, clearing the board for us to swing in. But I would actually argue one of the best gods that you could put in this deck would be Ohir Ashnal Deepest Might, mainly because he works hand in hand with Atreus and Kratos. He has that ability: if a red source you control would deal damage to an amount of non-combat damage less than Ohir Ashnal's power to an opponent, that source deals damage equal to Ohir Ashnal's power instead. Atreus has that ability of dealing 2 damage to each opponent when you tap him. Instead of 2 damage, it will be 4 damage with Ohir Ashnal on the battlefield. And of course with Kratos, you're putting +1/+1 counters equal to the amount of experience counters on a creature you control at the beginning of your end step. So you could just put all those counters on Ohir Ashnal. Let's just say hypothetically you had 6 experience counters and put 6 1/1 counters on Ohir Ashnal, making him a 10/10. You tap Atreus, draw those cards, but not only that, deal 10 damage to each opponent. That is huge. I just love the synergy behind these 3. So Ohir Ashnal might be the best god you can put in this deck, but the more flavorful option would be Kratos, God of War. This really doesn't synergize with the game plan, besides the fact that if you buff him up with the other version of Kratos, he'll become huge with double strike. Of course, all creatures have haste, so that we could use Atreus right away on that activated ability, and Kratos could swing in right away too. So there is some pros to this, but of course there are some cons. The fact that all creatures are going to have haste, that includes your opponent's creatures, and at the beginning of each player's end step, Kratos deals damage to that player equal to the number of creatures that player controls that didn't attack this turn. So of course we might be swinging with our command commander with Kratos, but we're going to be tapping Atreus. We're not going to be swinging with him, so most likely we'll be taking damage here and there. So again, this is more of a flavorful option, but it does work in the aspect of giving Atreus haste, or if you buff it up with the other version of Kratos, he will become huge and a big threat on the battlefield. So now that I've talked about the ways we could get experience counters, I wanted to shift my focus into talking about winning the game. In the new versions of God of War, you come across 3 different weapons to help aid you into victory against the gods. There is the Leviathan Axe, the Blades of Chaos, and Dropnir. And I wanted to represent them in a way that made sense. I'm going to first start off with the Leviathan Axe, mainly because that's the first weapon we use in the new games. So what equipment do I feel like represents the Leviathan Axe? And honestly, this was a tough one. I was going to go with the Reaver Cleaver because it's a cleaver, but it was red. It's not necessarily a blue card that would work with stunning opponents, but I ended up going with the Leyline Axe, mainly because the equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has double strike and trample. And not only that, this is a flavorful option because if this card is in your opening hand, you may begin the game with it on the battlefield. Because we're beginning the game with the Leviathan Axe, it just kind of made sense in my head. Plus, this is really good with Kratos or other creatures that have huge power. Giving them double strike and trample is going to be huge. But let's move on to the next one, and my personal favorite. Those are the Blades of Chaos. These are my weapons of choice against many different enemies, mainly because of how smooth they were in the game. And not gonna lie, the buildup of getting the Blades of Chaos in the first game was just incredible.
You will always be a monster.
So the equipment, I believe, works very well as a representation of the Blades of Chaos would be Embercleave. For one, he surprises a lot of opponents with the Blades of Chaos, and that's why it has Flash. Also, equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has double strike and trample because there's 2 blades, that means double strike, and of course trampling over your enemies. I just thought it was a perfect flavorful option. And last but not least, we have Dropnir, and this one was made for Kratos out of all the other weapons. And since spears are a weapon of choice for Spartans, I really felt the impact that Dropnir had in the game. But besides that point, the one card that would represent Dropnir would be easily Shadow Spear. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has trample and lifelink, but most importantly, it has that ability to pay 1 permanent your opponents control, lose hexproof, and indestructible until on a turn. And that ability alone made me feel like that it was the best representation of Dropnir. In the game, Dropnir was designed to defeat Heimdall, who is the god of foresight, and because you disrupt his senses with Dropnir, making him lose that hexproof and indestructible, it just makes complete perfect sense. All 3 of these equipment can help us achieve victory in our game because the more we power up Kratos with those 1/1 counters, the more we could give him trample and maybe even double strike and win over against those foes who have those indestructible and hexproof creatures. But of course, one of Kratos' most powerful abilities is his Spartan Rage, and I feel like the best way to represent that Spartan Rage is by going into extra combats. Kratos wants all the smoke with his fist. And this is where the deck really explodes. There are some one-off spells like Relentless Assault, Savage Beating, and World at War, which is also going to be in that Kratos God of War Secret Lair that is focusing on the Greek saga. So there is one big reason why extra combats work with both commanders. Kratos, of course, wants to attack with gods to get more experience counters, but most importantly, a lot of extra combat cards will untap all creatures you control. That includes Atreus. That is pretty significant because Atreus has a tap ability, so when you go into the extra combat, untapping all creatures you control, instead of attacking with them, you can just pay 3 and tap them to just draw more cards. There are also some creatures that will give you extra combats. You have Hort Razor, Scourge of the Throne, or even Aurelia the War Leader, which could be represented as another Valkyrie. And I just gotta say, the Valkyries out of all the other bosses were the hardest ones to fight, especially in the first game. I managed to complete them on the Give Me God of War mode, and that was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life as far as video games go. Besides that point, if you do want infinite combats, you could use Aggravated Assault and mana generating creatures like Cavern Horde Dragon, Ancient Copper Dragon, and Neheb the Eternal. As long as you're producing 5 or more mana on each combat, untap all your creatures, pay into that activated ability, go into the extra combat, and just win the game from there. So there's a way you could get infinite combats, but you could also get infinite turns with Kratos and another card. And this does require some sort of setup. You need 5 experience counters with Kratos on the battlefield and Sage of Hours. The combo is pretty simple. At the beginning of your end defense step, put 5/1/1 counters on Sage of Hours, then you remove all those +1/+1 counters from it. For each 5 counters removed this way, you take an extra turn after this one, and so there you have it, infinite turns. I know a lot of people groan when they see infinite turns, so it's one I might tread lightly with, but again, I really love the idea of extra combats because that's what really Kratos is all about, all that smoke, fighting everybody in his path in order to achieve victory. So there you have it, that is my Kratos and Atreus deck. I am so excited for this to release. God of War has to be one of my favorite games of all time. This is a story about growth, epic battles, and a father and son bond that just hits me in the feels. For me, it's more than just a pile of cards. It's my way of celebrating one of my favorite games of all time. This deck doesn't just win, it feels like a saga every time you play it. The father and son dynamic, the divine trials, and the relentless battles, all of it comes together into something that's both powerful and deeply flavorful. But now I would like to hear from you. If you were to add one god, creature, or even a weapon to capture the essence of God of War, what would it be? Drop your thoughts in the comments, I'd love to see your ideas. And if you enjoyed this deck breakdown, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more epic commander content, and ring that notification bell so that you don't miss the next video. So with that out of the way, thank you for stomping by.